All right. Can we stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any board announcements? I see none. Do we have any committee reports? I don't think any committees met since last week. No. So we have policy 8635, information and data privacy, the first reading. So we'll leave that as the first reading for now. I'll ask if any board member has any comments to the policy to either mark up their copy of the policy or provide edits or provide your comments to Ms. Lee for her to take it back to the policy committee. Otherwise, we'll proceed with the next reading. Does that work for you with Ms. Lee? Okay, thank you. All right. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda items 6 through 10?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is there any new business? Yes, no?
No.
Okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn to a board workshop at 8:15 p.m.?
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay. So how do we want to move forward with the workshop? Dr. Pridgett, do you want to take it? Does Ms. Costner want to take it?
So, Mr. Jacobs, what I'm going to do is we actually have a pretty well scripted evening because we are fortunate here this evening to have our project team, and I know that we broke down as a board. We sort of broke down sort of our questions. We were last week as a board. We were able to express our concerns and our considerations and our questions, and in anticipation of this evening having our project team here. So what I'm going to do, if you, with your certainly your blessing, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Coster, who will introduce the team. And I think because we have this time with Clark Patterson Lee as well as Mr. Rodriguez and his folks from the construction management team, we want to optimize our conversation with them. So what I will do is, Mrs. Coster, if you would kindly introduce our presenters this evening, I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Pritchard, and good evening, everyone. And thank you to our project team and our cabinet administrative team being here this evening for the workshop. So before we review the agenda, I would like to introduce with us tonight is Lauren Tarcio, who's our architect from Clark Patterson Lee. Joining her from her team is Ingrid Martinez, as well as Dave Sammel and Dave Huntsberger. Joining them this evening is also Lou Rodriguez, our construction manager from the Palumbo Group. Also, I would like to add to our team this evening, although everyone knows her, Jen Citrolo, our communication specialist, has been an integral member of the project team and given great advice in terms of timeline, community engagement, and the public relations end of capital project development. So again, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. We also have Mr. Jack Rallo, our Director of Facilities, another critical member of the team who spent his first year not only joining us in the middle of a pandemic, but very, very busy helping us develop a capital master plan. So thank you, Jack, for being with us this evening as well. I'm just looking at the long list to make sure that I did not miss anyone, and my apologies if I did. And again, we have our cabinet here as well as another resource for this evening. So for just keeping track of time, as Dr. Pritchard mentioned, we have a pretty scripted evening. Listening to the board at the last workshop, we planned this meeting to really make sure that we left a majority of the time for the experts that are here tonight to walk us through a scripted agenda, reviewing the scope of work, but left plenty of time for the board to have discussion and ask the experts any questions that you may have as we move along this evening. So the format of the evening, we left the takeaways from last week, noting scope that were the health and safety or the must-do items. So the team will walk us through that in greater detail this evening and pause for any dialogue and questions. And then they'll continue to move on to other prioritized scopes of work, which pretty much relate to either the high or medium priorities that were listed on the spreadsheet. So majority of this evening that you'll see by the agenda is dedicated to the time with the team presenting and dialogue with the Board of Education. And then towards the end, we'll debrief with any remaining questions. And at the end, the goal of this evening is to seek further direction from the Board of Education to refine our team's work in terms of scope of work to look at as we move along in the process. Also, before we begin, I just want to go over the materials that were distributed to the Board of Education and by electronic means this afternoon, as well as in hard copy. The board did receive a copy of the presentation, which is on the screen this evening. I will let you know that the team did make some slight modifications to the slides just to further the discussion along as well. And I will get the board an updated copy at the conclusion of this meeting, as well as it will be posted on our website. In addition, the Board of Education and the team will reference the spreadsheets by school, which is listed as our 5-year capital master's facilities plan. And for the purpose of ease and not having different copies to reference and compare, the team put together the spreadsheet and combined the scopes of items that the board saw last week on the spreadsheets, but added the student benefit legend and the rest of the legend in terms of how the team originally made recommendations for certain levels of referendum. You'll notice that that's now on the right-hand side of the spreadsheet. So we wanted to provide the board with one set of documents to look at and review as we move along in the discussion this evening. So just for everyone listening, those are the documents that we will reference this evening, as well as we did enlarge in a copy of a sample referendum schedule that is on the slides as well. So between those 3 documents, the presentation, a sample referendum schedule, as well as the 5-year capital facilities plan spreadsheet are the documents that we'll be referencing this evening. And so let's get started. What I'd like to do now is turn the evening over to Lauren Tarcio and Lou Rodriguez, who will work with the team to carry us through the discussion. So with that said, Lauren and Lou, I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to you, and just please let me know as you need the slides transition from one to the next.
Great. Thank you, Alicia. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Alicia, do you want to switch slides? Okay, so as Alicia noted, we did go through a master planning process, and I'll briefly take you through it. I think you've already heard a lot of this before, but we started with the building condition survey scope of work. So what we did was last summer of 2019, we walked through your buildings and developed a scope of work from our expertise, looking at all of your systems and finishes, and really coming up with an evaluation of the useful life of where you're at with all of that. And this is something that SED requires us to do every 5 years, and they've recently changed their rules a little bit. But so this is a required thing that we have to do for SED, and every district has to do. But it's a good starting point for a process like this, and it really just gives you a good snapshot in time of where all of your systems are, and really it's a good tool to start beginning conversations like this. So this was really step one in the process. Along with that, we got people involved as far as the stakeholders, namely the principals. We sat down with each one of them and developed a list of what we'll call program work. And we really asked those principals to look, into the future. We're doing a master planning process that is really looking about 20 years into the future, 15 to 20 years. So we really wanted them to be very future forward and think outside the box. So you'll see on the spreadsheets that were provided to you, those items have a number of 000 ahead of them. So those are all the items that really came out of those meetings with the principals. And that's really what was the catalyst to develop the long range capital plan. And that's all the backup material you have with those same spreadsheets. So you'll see some photos that go along with the spreadsheets, and then a series of concept plans, just going through different scopes of work, whether it be BCS or program work, but really just ideas looking into the future, starting very big picture, and then multiple iterations that we ended up with that we'll be presenting to you tonight. Along with that, we talked about prioritization and categorization of the scopes of work. So what we did was we started to notice some trends amongst your buildings as far as the BCS went. And you'll see more of that tonight as far as HVAC work, electrical work, fire alarm work. A lot of the work that we were identifying really went from building to building, is very similar in scope. And then lastly, we took all of that information and we provided it to the Palumbo group, and they were starting to look at a budget. So we're looking at very high level budgeting work. And Lou, if you want to jump in, but it's very important to note at this point, we don't have a hard design. This isn't an estimate, and it's important to note the difference between an estimate and a budget. We are basically coming up with a number that we need to work within to develop documents that can later be estimated. So again, we don't have a real design. Palumbo is looking at industry standards, some recent bids of similar work to really come up with a good idea of what the project budget should be. And then another important thing to note is we'll be talking, when we're talking in costs, we're talking in project costs. These project costs not only include the actual construction costs, but also escalation, soft costs, so fees for insurance and engineering and lawyer fees, all of that. So it's really a soup to nuts project cost, so not to be confused with construction costs. So ultimately, we gave the full scope over to Palumbo, and we came back with a price for the full scope, so everything that you're looking at in your master planning documents, of close to $170 million. So just to get an idea of where we stand district-wide for everything, this is your 20-year plan. That's what we were looking at as far as value of that work. So that's where the prioritization really comes in. We can't do all of that work at once. That's a big nut to crack there. So we looked at more of the higher priority work from the BCS standpoint. When we were prioritizing, CPL did the priorities along with Jack Rallo. And we really looked at current code requirements. We evaluated the useful life of your systems, looking at the age and condition of that. And then as far as the program scope goes, the principals were asked to prioritize their scope. And it was really, it came down to what was most impactful to the students and what had the highest student benefit. So that's really where we landed with the prioritization. And then tonight we'll be coming to you with a proposed scope of work. So this is really focused on health and safety. So Alicia, if you want to go to the next slide. So the scope of work, like I said, is very health and safety oriented. We're looking at a project value of roughly $60 million. Again, this is very high level, so keep that in mind. It's never going to be $60 million exactly. So that we're just looking at a roundabout value. So starting with district-wide HVAC, there's HVAC work that would need to be done based on the BCS at every building. So we kind of lump that into one total project. So this, if you're looking at the spreadsheets, you know, this is roughly, I think you had the spreadsheet last meeting that we weren't at that had some project values associated with it. But the district-wide HVAC work is about $40 million. That also includes some electrical work, which we'll get into in just a minute here. So as far as every building, we are looking at changing the HVAC system throughout. And I mean, not every single system, but we're looking at a more holistic view of the district. And we really evaluated, along with Jack, we evaluated 3 separate types of systems. So right now you have a unit ventilator system. So you basically have a unit in every classroom and it provides your heating. It also provides your fresh air. So it's a very economical system. The next system that we evaluated was a variable refrigerant flow system with energy recovery, which is it's a more of a central system. You wouldn't have necessarily individual units for dedicated outdoor air. You would have one central unit for that, but then you would have individual units for your heating and cooling. And then lastly, we looked at a chilled beam system, which is a little more complex, but it's basically a series of units in your ceilings that's piped and ducted, and it provides your fresh air and your heat and cooling. So it's 3 very different systems. We were looking at, we were weighing different options with upfront cost, efficiency, both with the cost to run, and then serviceability. So how easy is the system to service and to maintain. So where we landed with that was really a variable refrigerant flow, so the VRF system. So Jack really thought that was the most beneficial system to the district. And I think ultimately you'll end up with a blended system if we do choose to go this route. It would be, we do recognize that we do have equipment that has recently been installed. So we don't want to undo things that we've already installed. Last summer we did some UV work. This summer in the library, we have a whole rooftop unit system on top of the library at SOM. So we want to be careful about, redoing work that has already been done. You're collecting building aid on that work, and that wouldn't be detrimental if we went backwards. So that's not the intent here. We would evaluate the buildings carefully, understand what systems have been installed in the last 15 years, and work around that. So ultimately speaking, under this scenario, we're looking at more of a blended system of different types of HVAC systems, but ultimately the base would be the VRF system. So along with that, we're looking at providing cooling. It's getting more and more prevalent that students and staff are requiring cooling for medical needs. This would eliminate any of your window AC units, and it's definitely a more efficient system than the AC units, having a centralized system. So the cooling would be in classrooms, offices, large group spaces. Again, if your spaces already have cooling, I know there was a significant amount of work done at the middle school this summer on offices. We wouldn't undo that work. We'd leave that and then just basically supplement it with the classrooms and any spaces that have not been had added cooling. And then lastly, as far as a district-wide would be direct digital control, so a DDC system. And this is the system that controls your HVAC. Right now, you have a blend of pneumatic controls and some DDC controls. The pneumatic controls are very antiquated at this point. They're hard to control. They're difficult to get on a building management system. So DDC, if you're going to do any HVAC work, you're going to want to upgrade to a digital controls. So of course they're much more reliable and then easier to maintain your energy, doing energy management with a BMS. So then lastly, as far as HVAC goes, and it sort of gets lumped in with redoing a full HVAC system. But if there's any equipment or systems that are beyond their useful life, we would be addressing those. And a lot of that lays in exhaust fans that are non-functional. There's some abandoned equipment that we would need to address. In some cases, and I think it's actually just in SOMES, boilers would need to be replaced along with pumps. And then there's some piping and tunnels that would need to be addressed. So that's where as far as district-wide, the scopes sort of skew amongst the individual buildings. And Alicia, if you want to continue to the next slide. This is what it looks like building to building. And this is really a snapshot of the spreadsheet that you guys had from the last meeting, which is really just the scope of work that we're looking at as part of our recommendation at this point. And you'll see at CLE, we're looking at exhaust fans that aren't operational and potentially either replacing them or if they're not needed to remove them. There is a rooftop unit that appeared to be abandoned. That would be a situation where we'd want to either replace that or remove it from the roof altogether. There's some air handling equipment in the gym. If we're redoing an entire HVAC system, we'll want to address that. They're close to original equipment. There's some relief air issues throughout with classrooms and some spaces on the interior that don't have proper relief air. The big item here is unit ventilators. This is all BCS work, and it really addresses the systems that you have now, but really what we're looking at is either an option to replace the unit ventilators in kind or go with the VRF with energy recovery system. So again, speaking with Jack, the preferable method would go to the VRF. And then, like I said before, air conditioning units would then be removed out of the individual windows. We would handle any cabinet heater and fin tube that is at the end of its useful life, replacing pumps in the boiler rooms, and then of course controls. And we're going to go through every building and you're going to start to see some repetitive scope. But just to give you an idea of when we are talking about district-wide HVAC, this is what we're talking about. And you'll see also the priorities being high, medium, some are low. The reason you're seeing, we want to attack the high priority items. But the reason you may see some some low or medium items is because it ends up being sort of circumstantial that we end up taking care of some of these items as a result of replacing your HVAC system. So that's in this case in HVAC, and you'll see this as we move through in the electrical scope, the fire alarm scope. You'll start to see how things sort of just get lumped in, just because circumstantially, they'll have to be taken care of as part of that overall scope. So you want to move forward to Schaefer. So at Schaefer, you're seeing the same sort of thing. We have rooftop units that are at the end of their useful life, replacing those. And again, circumstantially, that would happen if we did go through and redo the HVAC system. Same thing with the window air conditioning units. If we went with a cooling option, those would go away. We still have similar relief air issues in this building as we do in CLE. Exhaust fans, again, some non-operational and some that do need to be replaced. Same scope with the unit ventilators, going with a VRF system. You'll see here we have a low priority item for AC in the teacher's reading room. This is, again, one of those items that just gets taken care of if we change the UV system over to a VRF system. It sort of just happens as part of that scope of work. We have a couple of ventilators in the gym that would be replaced, some pumps in this boiler room that would be replaced, and then, again, controls. Next slide. At SOMS, it's more of the same: unit ventilator work, relief air work, exhaust fans. We have some heat pipes in the tunnels throughout the building. I believe when we did budget out this project, Lou, correct me if I'm wrong, we were looking at changing the buildings over from a steam system to a hot water system. So that's one of those situations where this item out of circumstance goes away. We wouldn't be repairing or replacing steam piping. We'd really be going back into the tunnels and replacing it with water piping.
That's correct. Yep.
Thanks. We have some boilers. This is another low item, but because we're doing such a massive scope or proposing such a massive scope on the HVAC side, we would propose to replace. There's 2 boilers. There's 4 total boilers in this building, but 2 are older and are about ready to go. So again, we have window air conditioning, pumps. We have some degraded pumps, and then the HVAC controls with this building as well. Next one. And then the high school. I had to cram a little bit too much onto this slide, but again, we're looking at boilers, not really replacing the boiler itself, but just replacing the burners. They're different ages. HVAC equipment, there's one of the biggest complaints that we had in this building from maintenance staff was just throughout the building, there's general HVAC breakdowns going on here, there, and everywhere. So we'd just be doing a real good survey. And again, part of happenstance, if we're doing the HVAC system, we want the whole system to be balanced. We want to make sure all of the systems, your relief air, your supply air, everything is functioning. Again, we have air conditioning units that go away if we add a cooling option. We have some condensing units on the roof that would either go away, depending on the system that we provide to that space, or possibly be replaced. Exhaust fans throughout the building, same scope as the other buildings. Some exhaust air, relief air in the classrooms. Again, same scope throughout the district. The unit vents in this case are broken up by wing because it's such a large building. We did that on purpose to look at different phasing options throughout the high school, and then what that did to a budget. We have some situations where, like item 920420, unit ventilators in one office is actually split between 2 rooms. So this happens a lot when you renovate. A wall sometimes gets put down the middle of these UVs. So this is, again, one of those situations that would get corrected if we were to revamp the HVAC system. We have air conditioning in the band room in the woodwind area, specifically for instrument storage. And again, if we were to provide air conditioning, that gets taken care of. HVAC noise. This is really, there's a unit on the auditorium that provides, I guess there's a little bit of vibration in there. So when you're in the space, you can hear that. And that's another thing that we should tackle while we're looking at an HVAC scope. Again, we have ventilation air. We have some steam leaks in the tunnels with the piping. This is the same scope as the high school, would be replaced if we switched over to a water system. And then again, pneumatic controls. So like I said, you're seeing a lot of scope that's sort of repetitive throughout every building, but there's a few items that are outliers building to building. So Alicia, if you want to go to the next slide.
Yep.
So these are just some representative photos, and I think you guys have seen a lot of these before. We have exhaust fans, like I said, in every building. There's some manner of something going on with each of them. You got pneumatic controls. That's a good representation of what that looks like. It looks pretty antiquated, a little bit NASA-ish. At Soames in the top right corner, you have a unit ventilator that's original to the building. High school condensing unit on the roof. This is what I was talking about. It's either would be replaced with a different system or replaced in kind. That's at the end of its useful life. And then we have the boilers at Soames and then the pumps at Soames. So you can see that pump in the middle there. Maybe it's a little hard to see, but it's a little bit rusted out. Some parts have been replaced, some haven't. The pump in the very back is actually a new pump, so you can see the difference between the two. So it's kind of obvious when you just look around.
Lauren, just before we move on, what I wanted to ask the Board of Education at this time, would you prefer to stop and pause and discuss the HVAC portion of health and safety now, or would you like us to move through each one of the major scopes as it relates to the health and safety aspect and discuss at the end? Which would the board prefer?
I would prefer, I think, to go through it all for fear that if we started a discussion now on this one topic, we won't get through everything.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Lauren?
Okay, so part of the $40 million scope would be electrical. So we did deliberately combine HVAC and electrical together as far as a budget because they're tied pretty closely. So we did go through again with the BCS, identified that we would need additional branch panels throughout the district. I think every single building has some electrical capacity issues. You should remember over the last couple of summers, we've done a fair amount of electrical work throughout the projects. At Schaefer specifically and CLE, they both got new transformers over the last couple of summers. So this is not intended to be work to replace that work. It's work that supplements that work. So we're building upon work that we've already done. So branch panels is a natural next step, basically adding capacity to your current system. And then we have additional electrical capacity as it relates to the HVAC. So part of the HVAC scope is to add cooling, and that comes with a pretty significant electrical load. So as we've been doing work, we've known in the background that cooling requirements is something that was prioritized by the district and has been. So when we were replacing transformers, replacing service throughout the buildings, we were keeping that in mind. So we weren't designing backwards. This isn't work that we would have to redo. We already built that into the previous project. So really the support for the HVAC needs comes down to additional panels, some switchgear. We have switchgear in the project on a couple of buildings that would need some additional capacity there. So that's really what that means. And ultimately, the final scope is not, it's really not determined yet. We have to do a whole design on the HVAC side to really understand what the electrical needs are going to be in each building. And every building is going to be different. So that's a very conceptual scope right now. And then, go back one. And then lastly, we have replacement of equipment at end of useful life. So like I said, every building has slightly different electrical needs. They all need the branch panels, but then we know we've already replaced transformers in a couple of buildings. We've already done a new electrical service in a couple of buildings. So Alicia, if you want to go to the next slide now. This is what it looks like by building. So Cottage Lane, they need a new main distribution panel. Last summer, it was the summer before last, I guess now, we used up the last breaker in the MDP. So if we were to add anything else, cooling system, anything, we really do need to provide more room in the main distribution panel. And then we have additional branch panels and overloaded circuits. Those are almost the same type of scope, just adding more panels. Next slide. At Schaefer, the scope is a little bit different. In addition to the additional panels, we have replacing panels that are original to the building. So there's only a couple, but we're talking about panels that are already full. So we would be providing panels that have additional slots in them for new breakers. And then, any cloth wiring that might be going to those, taking care of that sort of a thing. Next slide. At Soames, again, we have electrical distribution panels like every other building. Here, we would need to replace the main distribution panel. Same reason for CLE, just out of space. And then in this building, we haven't done a transformer replacement yet. So that would be on the list for Soames. Next slide. And then at the high school is actually the best, in the best condition electrically for what we're proposing to do. So really the only work here would be replacing existing panels and then adding a few more for additional capacity. Okay. All right. So next scope is security. This scope stemmed out of a meeting with Day Automation. They came to the district and did a presentation on all sorts of different scopes. We have video surveillance, wireless access control, a lockdown system, which is a pretty sophisticated system now. It's over internet. It's a very simplistic system, really. When you hit the button, you're in lockdown mode. It notifies the whole building. It notifies authorities. There are strobes. There's different notification methods that notify people outside of the building. In addition to that, we're looking at voice over internet protocol, or the VoIP system. So this is the internet type, internet-based phone, and it really allows connection to your fire alarm and your PA and your lockdown system. They're all tied together. And then clock and speaker replacement. So I did listen to the recording of the last meeting, and there's a lot of discussion about the clock and speaker replacement. But I wanted to be clear in this meeting that clock and speakers, it wasn't simply, oh, the clock is old and let's replace it. And I know there was a fairly large dollar amount allocated to this type of scope. But what it really is replacing your system so that it ties to your lockdown system and your security. And I think that's really important to note. They have these new clock systems. They're wireless, they're internet-based, they automatically update. But they also come with enunciation. So with that lockdown, this is another one of those systems that would notify building occupants of a lockdown situation. They change colors, they have audio notifications, they have written notifications. It's actually a much more sophisticated system than what's currently in the building. Next slide. So every building it really has the same scope. I'm showing CLE here. But you'll notice on your spreadsheets, every building will have the exact same scope. So this is really just representative of the whole district. And it's really everything that we just went through. So I won't belabor the point, but I'm going to go to the next slide. And then some representative photos of what's in the buildings now. We have some security cameras. Really, the intent of the scope of video surveillance is to supplement what you already have, take care of any blind spots, and just adding coverage. You'll see the security keypad there and the phone system. Both would be internet-based. Right now you just have a standard phone system. With the new phone system, connecting and having that ability to tie into your PA system and fire alarm and everything really would be key, and really speeds up an emergency situation if there were to be one. And then access control, this is just a photo of a door, but on the very right-hand side, you'll see the little keypad there, or really the, I can't even think of the word, the key fob pad there. The access control scope, again, is not replacing what you already have, but really adding to it. The access control is both interior and exterior. Not every one of your doors has access control or wireless access control. And then the clock and PA system. So this is the original clock and PA system at the high school. And again, I think I've already said it, but the new systems are so much more sophisticated, and from the safety standpoint, they're really worth looking at. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the fire alarm system. This was allocated about $4 million in the spreadsheets that you were looking at last week. Same scope really throughout the district. We're looking at replacing the outdated fire alarm system with a new system that complies with the current code and the SED requirements. So your systems now were installed several years ago under a different code. It's not to say that they're not compliant in any way. They are. If something was installed under an old code and it met that code, it's basically grandfathered into now. So you're not in a non-compliant situation right now. But recently the code has changed. So in 2018, the code changed that to require a verbal notification system as opposed to an alarm system. And I'm sure everybody has heard the studies that children respond better to voice commands. So really it would be an effort to update the system to have that type of a system. Along with that, it would be updating the outdated smoke detection. The current code requires classrooms and bathrooms to have smoke detectors and strobes. That is not the case with what is installed now. And then outdated emergency and exit lighting would also be proposed to be upgraded. So it's really just changing out to LED, adding more coverage. Current codes are asking for more exit lighting, more exit or emergency lighting type of situation. So again, you're not code compliant, but because the code did recently change, it's definitely something it's really something worth looking at. So next slide. So again, I'm using CLE here as an example, but every building has this exact same scope, and it's just what we had just gone over. Outdated smoke detection, outdated emergency and exit lighting, and just a simple upgrade to the fire alarm system to bring it up to the current code. Next slide. And then these are just some representative photos of what's in the buildings now. This fire alarm pole station at the high school, this is an older pole station. The newer ones, they're much more secure. It's much harder to accidentally set off a fire alarm. You've got some fire alarm battery boxes. As you can see, those are very old. They're probably original. The fire alarm panel at Soames, These panels, it does look newer, of course, than the photo next to it. However, it is an older panel, and the older these panels get, the harder it is to find replacement parts for. And then the 3 photos below are really just photos of different devices and exit lighting and emergency lighting, and it's all older. It's not LED type fixtures. So next slide. And then we just have some general health and safety projects. They're not necessarily district-wide. Some of them are in very specific buildings. But I will start with the district-wide bathroom renovations. This is really worth about $3 million on that spreadsheet. It's really bringing whatever bathrooms have not been renovated in the recent past up to ADA compliance. It also includes at CLE a gender neutral bathroom. So I know we're talking about health and safety, but part of that is really the social and emotional health of the students. And then next item here is the locker room renovation at the high school. This is one of those items where it's not only, bringing it up to an ADA compliance, but it actually does touch upon the social and emotional well-being. Right now, the way the high school locker room, the boys' locker room in particular, is set up, there's a trainer's room that you have to walk through to get into the boys' locker room from the gym. That's not ideal if you're a girl using the trainer's room. So really that ties into the social and emotional aspect. So we'd be proposing to rework that space so that the flow really makes sense and there is separation between the two. Next item is the high school and CLE main office and secure entrances. So far we have done work at Soames and at Schaefer on their main entrance so that when you walk into the building, you have the option to walk directly into the main office without going into the building itself. So we really want to create equity amongst the buildings. At the high school, the security office is outside of the main office. It makes sense to have them in the same office, similar to the other buildings. I think the tie is important to make sure that they're directly adjacent to administration. At CLE, the situation right now is you have to walk into the building before you see a security guard. So we want to make sure that all your main entrances are secure. Along with CLE's main entrance, it's not specifically written here, but we're looking at reorganizing and relaying out the bus loop. So we want to have a separation between bus traffic and car traffic. So that goes along with that entrance work. And then lastly, another social and emotional type project is the Prevention and Wellness Center at the high school. So we have one at Soames that was completed over the summer. The high school has one currently, but it's in an undersized space. It's really not appropriate for, it's right outside the library. It's really not appropriate for what the needs are. So what we'd be proposing is to take the assistant principal's office and move them into the main office and then create a prevention center and a guidance suite out of that area. So there's a little bit of shifting, and in the materials you have some floor plans, some concept plans that speak to that, and some different phasing options at the high school. So you want to go to the next slide. So again, going building by building, and these scopes mean very different things at different buildings. So at CLE, when we're talking about the bathroom scope, we're talking about the gender neutral bathrooms. Again, social and emotional health. And then the scope as it relates to the main office and the bus loop drop-off area. We have obviously the new drop-off area and landscaped entry, but then there's a couple of BCS items that fall into play and just naturally get taken care of if we are to rework that whole area. Like we have some puddling in that area in front of the building. We have pavement issues in front of that building. The main entrance gate, I think Mr. Jacobs mentioned the last meeting, well, why would we do that in a capital project when we could just do that as a local district project? Well, this is the reason. It sort of gets taken care of as part of that scope. We would be doing a lot of demo in that area anyway. It makes sense to take that gate out. In addition to the exterior work, we're looking at the main entrance finishes, and that sort of just gets taken care of naturally with a security project in that area. And then the mailroom renovation, it's sort of reworking that space to make it, that whole entry space to make it so that it is more equitable amongst the buildings, the same type of flow throughout every building. Next slide. At Schaefer, the scope of work is really limited to the bathrooms. We did do some bathrooms the last summer, but we are looking at doing the additional whatever's left bathroom. So we're looking at the east wing individual classroom bathrooms and then the west wing gang toilet bathrooms. Next slide. And then at Soames, again, bathroom work here. Any bathrooms that we have not already taken care of in previous projects. So it's not redoing work we've already done. It's making sure that we're bringing all of the bathrooms up district-wide up to the standards that we've been expecting and we've been seeing the last couple of summers. Next slide. And then at the high school, with the main office and the security layout, it's really a renovation of the entire main office. Like I said, we have to move the assistant principal to be able to make way for the Prevention and Wellness Center. So it's really a reworking of that entire space, moving security over to the main office side. Prevention and Wellness Center goes along with that. So once the assistant principal moves out, Prevention and Wellness could then move into that space. Locker room finishes. Again, if we're reworking that floor plan, the finishes sort of naturally just get taken care of. The training room, renovating that training room, just changing how that flow works. And then the student bathrooms and staff bathrooms. So again, any toilet rooms, any bathrooms that we have not already renovated, we'll bring up to the district standards. And then these are just some representative photos again. You can see an older bathroom at the high school. It was a more recently renovated, probably 15, 20 years ago. But what we've been doing with the bathrooms is really actually changing the layout to make them more ADA compliant. I think the more recent, if a bathroom has been renovated in the last 20 years, more likely than not, it's just been a replacement of fixtures and finishes in kind, as opposed to really reworking the space and creating an ADA accessible space. Next slide over, or I'm sorry, next photo over is the main office at the high school. Really not a conducive layout for them. So it does make sense if we're bringing security over to their side and moving guidance out to do a renovation of that space. The next two slides or two photos over are the locker rooms, specifically the boys' locker room. It's got a lot of original fixtures in it. In addition, there's some visual issues as far as the lockers go. You know, you can see in this photo here, it's hard to see what's going on in each individual bank of lockers. So it's important to take care of that sort of issue as well. And then bottom left is a photo of the main office at CLE, or the main vestibule at CLE, just outside the main office. So this would be the space that we are proposing to renovate to make more secure. And then, of course, the existing bus loop at CLE. It's it's hard to see in a picture. I think in plan, it really shows how it's very difficult. The wayfinding when you pull into the building for cars and buses seems to be a little difficult to understand. And then, of course, the security. I've already said this before at the high school, moving the security booth into the main office, bringing them next to administration makes sense. Next slide. So this is just a quick summary of everything that we talked about just in one place. So I know we were going from scope to scope, building to building. This just gives you a good snapshot of everything that we just discussed.
And so, Board of Education and Lauren, thank you. Would like to pause at this moment for part one, just to break out into discussion amongst the board and the project team before part two would involve looking at other prioritized scopes of work. So if we could open for discussion. At this time, it's about 9:08, so I just want to leave plenty of time for discussion. Would anyone, Mr. Jacobs, would you like to start, or another board member, if you have a question or information that you'd like the team to go into further detail about?
Yes, I'll start. So I have a question going back toward the district-wide HVAC. And the slide seems to represent three types of systems. And then you were talking about a collective blended system. Maintain what's recently been installed and adding
Hey, Lonnie,
the flow.
you're a little muffled for me. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing that.
I'm getting feedback as well.
Here,
Is this better now? All right.
much better.
So I guess my question is, in terms of the cooling aspect of the HVAC, the district-wide HVAC, we're talking, you said it's a total of $40 million. I guess my one question would be, of the $40 million, how much of it is, the cooling aspect in terms of the cooling components as well as the additional electrical upgrade necessary for the cooling? And then, I'll use a trade name for my example, but the way it's been expressed in the presentation and in previous discussions is that we've done cooling with a Band-Aid approach up until now, that we've been throwing in window units where we need air conditioning. We've been putting in rooftop units where we need air conditioning. And this appears to be a more holistic type approach in terms of the cooling aspect. So I guess, in terms of, what we have now, is it working, and there's a maintenance cost associated with it, but, are we looking at adding cooling to additional spaces that aren't being cooled now? Or are we looking to make our existing, Band-Aid approach to cooling, more consistent and uniform throughout?
So I'm going to respond to the last question, which is, are we adding cooling to spaces that don't have it, or are we replacing the Band-Aid approach? It's a little of both. So what we're proposing is spaces that don't have the cooling would then be brought up to have the cooling. The spaces that have the window air conditioning units would not have the window air conditioning units anymore, but they would have the cooling option within the HVAC, the central system. So it's really both.
All right, and I guess there's been a determined need to air conditioning the spaces that aren't currently air conditioned? And I shouldn't say air conditioned, cooled.
Yeah, so I think the intent in what was budgeted is cooling in classrooms, offices, and large group rooms. So it's not like we would be cooling janitor's closets, storage closets, hallways. We would really be cooling the spaces that are most occupied.
Jack, would you like to offer? Because I know HVAC is your expertise.
Sure. Well, we have constant reminders every day, about cooling, whether it's a 504 or an IEP for children, or we have overheating issues every single day. So this is a really a big piece of the pie. I believe that this is also ties in with the proper ventilation that we need to have in our buildings. The proper relief air. It also ties in with our energy efficiency, which is by having a VRF and also a DOAS system, which is a dedicated outdoor air system. Basically, what you have when you have that is you really only need that during the occupied hours. So instead of having that running constantly, you have that running for about 8 or 9 hours a day, and you can actually work that into a pretty energy efficient little system. What you would also do there is you would keep the baseboard heat, lose the unit ventilators. You would be able to control the baseboard heat with pumps that would only have to run on really cold days. So you would be climate controlling your classrooms and your spaces, and then on really cold days, let's say it gets to be 20 degrees, your pumps would kick on, and your baseboard heat would act as a backup. And it doesn't have to necessarily be 20 degrees. It might be whatever, depending upon the building, whatever you want to decide to put it on. It could be 15 degrees. It also allows for the systems to become much more energy efficient in the boilers, because you're able to put energy efficient boilers in. Instead of having 180 degrees, you can run it down a little bit lower as well.
I'm not questioning the ventilation aspect of it, and
Okay.
I understand the ventilation aspect of it. I understand the control aspect of it. I'm trying to grasp and digest the cooling aspect of it, and that's why I asked the question as to of the $40 million, how much of that $40 million is a cooling component. Because I understand we've got cooling in the room sporadically right now, but again, in terms of the number of days in a year, we're in the school in September, and May into June in terms of when we have I'll say the truly hot days. Are we spending our money wisely, and how much money are we spending to provide this cooling? That's my concern.
Right. I think it would be very difficult to say exactly how much until we were able to get estimates on maybe a high level budget from Lou on what cooling would be, if it was added in or whether it wasn't. But I believe if we do the system as an HVAC, I mean, what do you think, Lou? Would you think it would be 20?
Well, yeah, I'll jump in. I think what's tough about the conversation is the way I budgeted this was to remove existing unit ventilators provide a VRF system that is providing heating and cooling, and then providing fin tube radiation on the exterior wall after the UV is removed. And that VRF is a DX system, so it's providing heating and cooling. And then separately, what I did was I put a separate cost to a chiller to supply chilled water to rooftop units for the large group areas, auditorium, cafeteria. So because those areas, you can either do two ways. The chiller is the most efficient way to do it. The upfront cost is more, but it's more efficient. Or you can go with a rooftop unit with a DX coil and do that as well for those big spaces. So I guess what's tough is, are we looking to sort of try to break this? The approach that we were talking about is either you do it or you don't, or do we mix and match? And I can definitely start breaking out cooling costs if we start talking about what areas. It's not like taking out an air conditioning unit, because if we're going to do VRF, the VRF is also tied to a direct outside air system. So you have a DOAS system that's on the roof that's introducing fresh air that's tied to that VRF. So I looked at it as a very specific system.
Here's
There's a lot of different
I
approaches.
understand what you're saying in terms of how you looked at it in terms of trying to implement the scope in the most efficient, manner with the most efficient systems and so forth. But where I'm coming at is that if capital I, capital F, if we're talking about a $60 million potential overall project, right? And we're spending $40 million of it on HVAC. I'd like to know that of that $40 million, which is 2/3 of our overall budget, are we spending, $20 million on cooling that we could use, in other areas to improve the student environment in a much, larger impact than $20 million worth of cooling. I'm trying to grasp the cooling aspect as a component of the $60 million budget that we're contemplating, because if it's a significant value, the question that I would have is that the best place to spend that money, or are there other places that I could affect more students or more areas with the money?
If I can add on, Lonnie, I heard Lauren's points clearly at the beginning that these are large buckets and estimates. I personally need some level deeper than just here's what you get for $40 million, right? But here's how much technically cooling costs, right? It's just too big of a number to just say, let's go ahead and do it.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think what we need to do is, there's different ways to cool a building. You can take your existing unit ventilators and replace them, and you can have a DX coil and a condensing unit that supports 2 or 3 classrooms. You can have a unit ventilator replaced and have a cooling coil that is supplied with chilled water. You can have the VRF system that we're talking about that really is a comprehensive approach that talks about cooling and heating of a space and radiant on the exterior wall. I don't think that the approach, what you're asking, how do you pull out or the air conditioning out of the VRF? You just wouldn't do the VRF. You'd go to a different system. I don't know that you'd say just you pull AC out of that. I just don't it just, I don't know.
So Lou, could you further break down, as you mentioned, there's other options. So in preparation for another future meeting with the board, could we work as a team and look to your expertise to break down different options in a more itemized fashion with cost and bring that back to the Board of Education?
Yeah. Yeah. So, the cheapest, of course, is direct replacement of your existing UVs. A lot of districts right now are dealing with the ventilation issues, and so what they're doing, if they don't have a lot of money to put towards a significant HVAC system, what they're doing is replacing UVs with a UV with a higher CFM rating. So if their current UV is 1,000 CFMs, they're going to replace it with something with 1,200 or 1,500 CFMs. And you're pushing, so now you're pushing more air in that space, right? And that's just strictly heating. The negative to that is that now if you replace that unit ventilator that's pushing 1,000 CFMs, and now you're pushing 12 to 1,500 CFMs, that noise, there's a student that's sitting right next to that UV, the noise level of that UV is going to be pretty significant. And the airflow, if you're sitting next to that UV, is going to be pretty significant. So there's been this talk of the VRFs has been that discussion of taking away from the UV on that exterior wall that affects that student that's sitting next to that UV, and now you're pushing air from the top, and you're bringing in outside air. That's why we were talking about the VRF. But there's probably 4 or 5 different iterations that we can really look at. And I agree with Lonnie. I think that when you look at cooling comes in a lot of different ways. You got a chiller, and you're bringing chilled water throughout the building, and you can do that throughout the whole building. You can do a mix and match, like I was sort of talking about. Some condensing units, some chilled water, or just do condensing units where you want to do them. So I've been with districts that said, you know what, there's specialized areas where we really need to make sure those students are taken care of. And we put in a unit ventilator with a DX coil, outside condensing unit. It's on a pad or it's on a roof. Do it that way as well. Or or what I've also had districts do, they buy UVs with a separate cooling coil. They don't buy the chiller up front, but they already know down the line, they're saying, hey, it's set up for heating and cooling. And that cooling coil is capped. And then when they're able to do it, the next phase of the job is bringing in the chiller and bringing in chilled water to UVs into that cooling coil. So there's a lot of different ways to skin this thing.
Plus, can I add a couple more things on this? Just said, a couple more expectations. One of the real reasons we talked about a VRF and an energy recovery system was the fact that with a dedicated outdoor air system, you reduce the amount of exhaust fans that you're going to need for the building also. So your exhaust fans become part of your dedicated outdoor air system, and it recovers the energy from the exhaust and feeds it back in through your VRF. So you're reducing the cost of running, heating and cooling in the buildings as well. The other thing that we talked about with the VRFs was that in a chiller, you do a chiller, and you got to run some pretty good sized lines through the building all in one shot when you want to do this. So you're ripping up ceilings and all of the stuff that's already existing. If you have ceilings done in the building and you put unit ventilators in, you're gonna rip out ceilings again in order to run main chiller lines, and the cost goes up as far as that goes. So I think for phasing and what we looked at for phasing with the high school and with the other buildings, if we're doing phases of work, this VRF and a dedicated outdoor air system is one of the best options for phasing.
And Jack, I gotta agree with you. What I like about the VRF system is that you can keep your existing system in play. At night we can take 2 or 3 classrooms and we're working them. We put the VRF system in. The existing unit ventilator stays in place. When the VRF system is ready to come online, we take the VRF system, put it online, and then we demo the existing UVs. And with the kind of work that we're looking at, the phasing allows us. There's no way to do all the work that we want to do over 5 weeks. So it does allow us to have some phasing. So we keep your existing heating systems in play while we replace with a new system. So I do like that about it.
So just to capture both with Mr. LaMadrid and Mr. Jacobs have said, and just the feedback, could the team go back? And I think, what we're hearing is a lot of benefit to these various systems to consider. But if we could give maybe, the 3 examples of what we could do with some more, finer breakdown in cost, if we were to, in whatever system, whether it's VRF or it's the unit ventilators with the extension of the cooling. And maybe what I've also heard, and I don't want to lose sight of it, is that if there's an energy savings component to this, we could do modeling of what the anticipated energy savings cost would be in relation to the cost of the systems over time, so that we can give the Board of Education a better snapshot, not only of the upfront cost, but what the expectations would be into the future. So if that's something that we could put together and bring back to the board, because I want to make sure. It's about 9:30 right now, and I'll tell you, we're taking very scripted notes tonight, so that we can be able to answer as many questions tonight, but also take it back. And anything that we have to provide more detail on, we'll certainly meet as a team and bring it back to the Board of Education. But I think this is definitely, as board has mentioned, this is a large ticket item on the overall recommended health and safety. So I do agree it's important to bring back some finer detail and analysis on what the cost of the systems are, along with the pros and cons, as well as, the anticipated energy savings, because I think what's been said tonight, that's, I don't want to be focused on cooling, is what I heard is ventilation and relief air, and the airflow, that's critically important for all of our classrooms, especially now. So if we could do that, if that's acceptable by the board, if we could take that information tonight and come back to you and with finer detail on that, and then move along if other board members have questions, on to that now, just so that we have enough time to make sure that we go through all of the scopes.
Alicia, I'm in agreement with that. I just, is there like a specific 1, 2, and 3 approach that would be? I think there's. I can be estimating for a long time. Is there like a specific idea? Like replacement in kind is like that's one approach to me. That's replacing kind. Take each UV. And maybe even replace it with a UV, another heating UV that's pushing more air, and it's just heat. And then there's, or is it strictly just an air conditioning discussion? I just, for me, it's helpful.
I mean, my question relates to what does cooling cost? What additional areas are we cooling that we aren't cooling now? And, considering the amount of our budget, is that an appropriate way to spend that portion of our budget? Right now, I don't know the answer to that, because I don't know how much I'm spending on cooling. I comprehend and I understand the ventilation aspect of it. But, look, we over the past, 8 months, we've come to a new way of education, and we've, always budgeted snow days in our schedule, right? Well, now we don't have to budget snow days because we have a way to continue teaching. Do we look at, instead of snow days, do we schedule hot weather days? And, I personally need to comprehend how much we're spending on the cooling aspect of this budget.
Okay, so we'll bring that back, and Lou will look at options that are maybe a VRF, maybe a just so we can isolate the option.
And you know what I'll do is per school. I think what's hard is that there's more going on than just the VRFs. Some schools, there's a conversion of steam to hot water. So when you look at the total number, it's not just the air conditioning component. There's taking the building, the existing boilers, converting them to hot water, and then running a hot water line through the buildings so that we have a hot water system as opposed to steam. So I think there's more going on than just AC as well. So, I think what I'll try to do is try to break out each area, just big picture, what's going on in each building, and then part of those numbers as well, it's not just AC. There's power upgrades. For example, at Soames, I have a significant power upgrade that's associated with Soames just for the building period. That's part of the HVAC. So you look at the HVAC number and you say, wow, that's a big number, but I have a big number in there for power upgrades. Whereas at the high school, the number might look lower, but I have less going in for power upgrades and a lot more going in for all the HVAC. But I lump that in as part of being one component. We were trying to make it simple as a read, but yeah, I can break those things out. Yep.
Okay. It sounds like that would be very helpful, Lou. Definitely.
Okay.
Ms. Lee, do you have a question?
Yeah, Alicia alluded to energy. His discussion was around energy savings, and I understand, there is opportunity for energy savings when you have a more comprehensive VRF system. However, because you're adding the more, the electrical aspect that Lou was just talking about, aren't you going to actually have more utility costs? So in addition to the energy savings, I'd also like to understand what would be our additional utility costs associated with this comprehensive system.
Okay.
So I'm actually glad you brought that up. I think it would be difficult to understand the savings because of that very reason. If you add cooling to the system, you are going to automatically have a larger load than you currently have. So to be able to compare what your load is now to what your load would be, it would be skewed. So there is energy savings in the sense of the outdoor air reheat. So the unit ventilator is just pulling outdoor air. It's not really tempered, and it dumps the air into the space, whereas the system we're talking about with the VRF with energy recovery is pulling outdoor air in, but it's using the heat from the indoor air to temper the air. So you're getting more savings there. Of course, you throw cooling into the mix, and it sort of skews the numbers in that respect.
So it sounds like it would make sense as Lou breaks down the options to isolate what a cooling option would look like. Maybe we could marry, again, with the understanding that it's a general estimate between the extra load and anticipated savings against each one of those options, and just to include that, but knowing that that's our best estimate right now based on the options we're presenting, just to have that breakdown as well, if that's doable. Because I just think it's an important point not to lose. There's the cost with the load, but again, we've talked a lot, I think, and Jack mentioned earlier, just about how efficient these systems are versus maybe possibly what we have now. So I think it's important just to flesh out that data so that we have it down on paper as part of the sample. So Christine, we'll look that down and get back as a team and just really give a full analysis on that. The good thing is we do have, not that we're ready for next week, I don't want to give the team a heart attack tonight, but we do have facilities on Tuesday night coming up. So we could certainly bring that to that meeting. The committee meetings have been very beneficial because everyone's at the table. So maybe we could discuss that in more greater detail, but I do agree. I think it's important to capture both of those aspects based on the further breakdown that Lou's going to do, you know.
Right.
And back to Dan's point about trying to look at this big system and not really having, you know, kind of a breakdown of what those options and what those costs are. It's hard to kind of have a deeper discussion about whether how much HVAC is included in a project or not without that information. So I'll keep the notes. You know, Bob and I see Bob writing away too. We're all taking a lot of notes this evening. So we will talk to the team and bring that back to you as the Board of Education.
And
Can I also ask a question about, I'm sorry,
Sure.
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add, I think, like Jack said, I think Jack, he's bringing up a great point. What happens is right now, how the systems are designed, you're bringing in outside air, it's being heated, and then it's being exhausted. With the direct outside air system, what it does, it captures that air, it's redirecting it, it's treating it with some air, and it's being brought back in. You know, as best we can, we'll try to talk about those efficiencies, but it's just a totally different animal. And it's actually a newer idea. I've done it now with 3 different districts, the direct outside air system, and the air quality inside the building is amazing. We put it in buildings that have mold issues. That's really what it was used for initially. But now it's becoming more of a really go-to kind of thing. But as far as the efficiency numbers, we'll do our best, but I know I'm going to have a hard time finding that. Maybe Lauren's engineers will have something on that, but yeah.
Sure. So I'm going to call that. I'm going to put it in the parking lot. I'm going to put that on a Post-it note on the side just for purposes of time. Christine, you had another question?
Yeah, I had a question about the alarm and lockdown system. Will this, what we're proposing, will it have card key reporting access as entering the building and exiting the building? I mean, we've had these conversations in the past about we don't really have a way to monitor how many people are in the building, how many people have exited the building. So if we're going now with a comprehensive system, will this system allow us to do that?
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the persons on this line is George. George, would you like to speak to that? Because I know you and I did a lot of work and a lot of meetings along with Jack looking at this.
Yeah, I'd have to go back to notes. Most of the systems will be able to tell you how many actually people are within the building. I'd have to see how we could certainly tie it into our visitor management system, because that would be the other piece. That wouldn't have access cards themselves. So that is something that I'll go ahead and research and see what we can figure out with them.
Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, this was one of the things too to add on when we received our Smart Schools bond money. That's when we kind of came back to the table in the capital planning, and these monies under our Smart Schools can be used for an overall safety project. So they look at things like the video surveillance, the lockdown. And, you know, one of the things that I just wanted to make sure we captured this evening was the PA systems and that connectivity too, that it's just all interconnected. But we'll take that back with our Raptor visitor system. I've used it previously, and it does have the ability to connect to these systems and provide that type of reporting. It's pretty simple programming. So the ability is there. We would just have to make sure, as George mentioned, with some research that it's linked to these systems that we do. But some of the vendors and some of the products we looked at previously, as Lauren mentioned, are really sophisticated, ease of use, but the compatibility between them is much greater than what they were historically.
Alicia, just so the board understands, I used a quote from Day Automation, and those are built into all my numbers. And within Day's numbers, they had video surveillance, and this was across all the schools. It was, almost 1.5 million in video surveillance. We had interior wireless access control that was throughout all the buildings. We also had exterior access controls. So we were adding access controls to about 50% of all of the exterior buildings district-wide. Then we also had one in there for a lockdown system in case of a 911. So you can do a 911 incident and lockdown capability. We also had in there monies for public address and exterior strobe.
Yeah.
And that was over $1 million district-wide as well. So we had quite a bit of money in there for all of these items: video surveillance, interior wireless, exterior access, lockdown systems, public address. Those were all part of what we had part of this bond.
Yeah, and one of the other things.
So one of my questions that addresses what was just said, during the presentation, we mentioned a specific vendor. So my question is, how do we know that we didn't get a sales job, that we're really, getting what we need and not what we want? And the other concern I have with this particular aspect of the project is, in 1960, when I bought the equipment, it was mechanical type equipment, and it's still on the wall and it's still functioning. In today's day and age, I'm buying, electronic equipment. I buy a TV, I buy a computer, I buy a router, I buy a modem. In 5 years, it's outdated, and I got to go buy another one. And I don't want to spend, millions of dollars on these, different types of, bells and whistles, only to find out 5 years from now I haven't even, paid off my bond, and I've got to update it. So I don't need an answer now, but before I make a decision, I want to make sure that I'm getting what I need and not what a salesman told me it's great to have. And I'd like to make sure that there's longevity and durability, and there's also interoperability. That I'm not married to a specific vendor, that I'm now hooked, that whatever I want to do, I have to continue with this vendor's product regardless of what he purchases it.
Right.
So those are the questions I have with regard to the security network.
Yeah,
Good
you
point.
make an excellent point. I know when we first engaged the vendor we just talked about, it was strictly from a budgeting standpoint. We knew from our smart schools bond how much we had available. In no way, shape, or form would we say that this is the ultimate vendor. And I'll be frank, within the 2 years, things have changed already. And actually, John Bellino and Jack Rowell and myself have actually been looking at other vendors as well. But as part of that long-range strategic planning, when we embarked on this 2 years ago, we were just getting budgetary numbers, so we knew what we were looking at and what was capable at that time. I would expect that we would have to do a full-blown, mini bid process just to see what's out there and what would be some competitive type systems. Yeah, correct.
Absolutely. So we can continue on that. Again, that's another note for the parking lot for further analysis, but great points, George. And the last thing that we are looking at in terms of the clocks and not thinking of the clocks that we have now would be the LED clocks, but they also incorporate English and Spanish language in lockdown. So that was another feature that we were looking for, was a multilingual communication system. Just to match our population, especially in the event of an emergency. So what we can do is write down those key attributes and as George mentioned, get more of a multi-vendor approach, and then look at it. What I'm hearing is from a longevity perspective, the operability. So we're not just stuck with proprietary equipment, but then what's the must-have versus the bells and whistles. Hey, Bob.
Yeah, I just wanted for clarification, to Lonnie's point, I heard a lot of some neat ideas being generated as far as technology and scope summary. Some of that's 10, 15-year-old technology. So an addressable fire system is not something that's new. I mean, this has been an industry standard for many years here. Voice over IP. These are not necessarily what I would consider to be cutting edge, and these are equipment upgrades and system upgrades that we currently don't have, and these definitely are not new technology. So they're not exactly, it's not Bell telephone era stuff, but it's certainly much more sophisticated than we currently have, and it's by no means new technology. So I just want to keep it in context. But I did hear tonight that we're very, very extremely cool setting with that sort of sci-fi appeal. As I'm looking at the scope summary, the fact that we don't have an addressable fire system, that would be something I think we would consider to be sort of a basic. It's not something that I consider to have. That has had some legs to it and some longevity. So just want to give you that context.
Okay. So do we have other questions? I know just looking at the proposed summary, and again, just any direction the board can give for further, any request for further information or detail. Tom?
About the TZ high school locker room, I don't see a price tag on this particular presentation, but I think in a previous presentation it was $4.5 million. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that is correct.
So I'm not in construction, but $4.5 million sounds pretty high for a locker room reconstruction.
So I do want to remind everyone that we're talking about project costs, and we're talking about a project that's several years into the future, potentially. So there are escalation costs, there are soft costs, there are costs above and beyond a standard construction cost. We're talking about also 2 locker rooms. I think I'm speaking for Lou here, but locker rooms are always a more expensive type of space to get into. And we're also proposing to reorganize the space and lay it out differently. So that really opens up a can of worms. And the space both girls and boys, hasn't been touched in forever, and in some cases not since it was built. So we know we have hazardous material issues to deal with as well. So I don't know that I would think that cost is terribly high, but I don't know, Lou, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. So we're looking at per what the program updates were, what we were talking about. It wasn't just the locker room renos. Part of that cost was also sports and therapy. So we're at 10,000 square feet of space that we're renovating. And Lauren's right. What tends to happen, and I'm pricing it at a little over $300 a foot. So that's $3 million hard costs today. What they tend to do is relocate bathrooms, showers. It happens all the time. Now we're trenching in an existing slab. to relocate all of those areas. And then the old locker rooms have no air distribution. So the whole ventilation is a big number in those spaces. And it's one of those things I can't, as much as I try to argue with the engineers as to why we have to ventilate those spaces, they say it's a requirement, and it adds big money to locker room renovations. Then there's the separation of team rooms and regular locker rooms. So those spaces, when you look at it, you would say it shouldn't be that much. 10,000 square feet, I should be able to build it at 200. It's not 200. All day it's 300, and we're projecting out we won't be touching those spaces. The earliest I would be touching that space would be the summer of 2023. So I'm projecting out to 2023. So it's I would love to say if you keep everything exactly the same and just replace lockers, you can really do it a lot cheaper. I have yet to work with an architect engineer that keeps exactly the same layout. Locker rooms are different today. So.
No, understood. So with showers, my understanding is that most students or most athletes don't use showers. It might be because everybody has a cell phone and, people are afraid that somebody could take a picture. Is there anything that you would do? I mean, are you finding that in your other construction sites where you're redoing locker rooms? Are there any kind of safety features? Are there doors and stalls so that people have more privacy?
There are, yeah, and you're exactly right, Tom. So what they're doing, they're creating more private, secure spaces. It's not an open shower stall as it was, and they're relocating them. So it's not, we're not building them in exactly the same space. So it's cameras. No, we have not put cameras in locker rooms. I haven't done any cameras in locker rooms.
No. I said other kids have cell phones and people might be afraid to use the phone.
No, you're absolutely right. And so stalls are a common, they're more of a common approach. Yep.
So for the schools that you have built or renovated, are kids using the shower? I mean, to Lonnie's point, I would hate to spend money on brand new showers and kids still aren't using them.
They're not using them.
We do typically provide some, because in the off situation where it may be necessary, we do want to have the facility available, but we may end up looking at providing fewer than what is existing. But Lou is right. We have been creating individual shower spaces. And that's really been the trend with the locker rooms. And because you're doing that, you're changing the layout entirely to be able to accommodate that. It's not the gang bathrooms or gang showers of the past anymore. So it does require a rethinking of the space.
Okay, thank you.
Kara?
Yeah, I have a question, just some clarification on the bathroom renovations. So you had said that the number is 3 million, and I just wanted clarification. Is that just the bathroom renovations, or is that all those renovations?
I'm assuming that question's for me. So what we have with the bathroom renovations, right now we had 650,000. We had about 650 at CLE, about 850,000 at Schaefer, 800,000 at Soames, and 700,000 at Tappan Zee.
Okay.
That's the breakout.
And then would that, if all of those bathrooms are done, then that will be every bathroom in the district
No,
is ADA
no.
compliant? No, there will be.
Well,
Oh,
no, so after we're done, the proposal here is to bring every bathroom that hasn't been previously brought up to district standards up to those standards. So to answer your question, yes, at when we are done with this project, all the bathrooms will be fully renovated. I think where Lou is thinking no is we're not touching every bathroom right now because we've already touched quite a few of them. So.
right. Right. I understand that. So, but in the end, then all the bathrooms will be ADA compliant or up to district
standards. So it's not really required that every bathroom be ADA compliant. You have to have a certain number of facilities available. In some cases, it's very difficult to make that happen. So the intent is really, you already have a number of bathrooms that have already been taken care of, and they may not be 100% ADA compliant, but they have been recently renovated. So we want to just leave those be and not undo work that was done. But then it's really focusing on some of the really older bathrooms that really need the facelift and more compliant fixtures. So just doing our best to make them ADA compliant. Let's put it that way.
Okay. And then each building will have at least one gender neutral bathroom.
Let me think about that. The high school has one. Soames, Alicia, I'm not sure if we have one.
Because I think adding one to CLE.
Yeah, we would and we'd have to add one to Soames, and then we would have at least one in each school. And I think, what we've heard, and I know Joe Lloyd's on the line too, just with the work at the beginning, and Kara, yourself as well, with the Equity Coalition, I think neutral is really important, and also looking at the proper signage and things like that and how we identify. But if we do turn one into Soames as a gender neutral, we will have one in each of the schools.
Okay, and that's in this plan then to do that?
Yeah, it can be, because we have to bring them up to district standards anyway. So we have a lot of bathrooms right now. Like, one of the reasons why, for example, Cottage Lane making one of those gender neutral is because to have a blend between a single bathroom that can either be used by staff or students. And that was of wanting a gender neutral bathroom, but also the location and just having the ability to have more access to a bathroom. It was what we can do within the footprint of the building. So we would look to do that similar with Soames. We've done a lot of bathroom work, especially this past summer here, but we would look to do that because it's critically important that we have that. So if we're touching the bathrooms, we can certainly design it and make it in a way that it is.
Okay.
Absolutely. And we have the ability at Soames. There's a number of singleton bathrooms in the building that are primarily used for staff right now. So we could look to, that haven't been touched, that we could look to renovate into that multi-purpose gender neutral bathroom. Okay. Kara, did we answer your questions okay with the bathrooms? Okay. Okay. Do any other board members have any questions regarding this first scope? I know we've had a lot of discussion on HVAC and some of the fire and security, bathrooms, locker room. Okay, could we move on to the next with the other proposed scopes? Okay.
Yeah, we should just be cognizant of the time also, because it's now.
Absolutely. Lauren, I'm going to switch the slides and I'm going to mute myself. Just let me know when you need me to switch the slides again, okay?
Sure. Okay, so I'll make this fairly quick, but you may have noticed we do have other scopes of work that didn't make necessarily the $60 million cut, but they are still high priority scopes. These are a mishmash of different types of scope. So it's health and safety, it is program, It's work that makes sense to be done within the scope of work that we're proposing under the $60 million project. So here's the list. I'm not going to read them verbatim, but then we have some proposed costs next to them. So just to get an idea, last time you met, I wasn't at that meeting, but the last time you met, you did have a document in front of you that itemized all these different scopes of work, and they all came to a roughly $80 million project. So what you're looking at on this slide is essentially that same list. So it's everything from the $60 million line out to 80 million. So this was just additional scope that we were considering. We wanted to put it in front of the board in case they saw anything that they thought, may be relevant to include in the project, or should we explore further? So before we move on, does anyone have any specific questions about this list? Any of the scope on here?
I do. For the William O. Schaefer classroom renovation, it's $4.5 million. I believe at last meeting, I was told there were only 12 classrooms that needed to be renovated.
Yeah, so we did a pretty exhaustive survey of all your classrooms and where they stand. And I think, Tom, you were part of a meeting where we were talking about this pretty in depth. And it turns out of all the buildings, Schaefer has a pretty big need for classroom renovations as opposed to some of the other buildings. So when we did go through, there were 22 classrooms that needed some version of renovation. And we were specifically looking at asbestos abatement in the floor tile and replacing the floor tile, replacing the ceilings, replacing the lighting, and replacing the casework. So those 4 scopes are spread over 22 classrooms in that building, not 12. And I'm not saying that every single one of those 22 classrooms needs all 4 of those scopes, but they need a combination or a version of those 4.
No, I agree. And I know the picture that you included in one of the presentations made it glaringly obvious. But in the last meeting, Dr. Coulott said this number also includes brand new furniture for any remaining classroom. Is that true?
This number includes soft costs, which could include FF&E, or furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So that would be an incidental cost to the construction cost. But yes, it could. Yes.
So how much is how much of that cost is in there? Or is it not that specific?
It's not that specific yet. So typically Palumbo will hold, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're at 20% for incidental.
Yeah. So the way it works right now, Tom, there's about 22,000 square feet of classroom space. And because of the limited scope, I'm holding about $150 a foot. So you take that and then you add the contingencies and escalation. And then, like Lauren said, I am holding 20% in incidental costs. The incidental costs are for professional services, they're for fit out, they're for bonding costs, they're for insurances, testing, inspections, whatnot. So you can average, after you take the $150 a foot, you can average about a 1.4 to 1.5 multiplier. And that's going to get you to the project costs, again, for building in 2023, 2024, depending on how the project is phased.
Okay.
If I could just comment in terms of the amount of classrooms to redesign, we're about 50% done across the district, but furniture costs are, depending on whether it's Tappan Zee High School or Soames or the elementary schools, it's somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000 per classroom. So that is not really being factored into these numbers.
Okay. On the science wing renovation, I believe at the facility meetings that Lonnie and I were at, we were told that the science wing would not move. It would stay in the same location. And when I looked at this, the smaller binder that you gave us over the weekend, I believe it's the ninth page from the back, it appears that you're moving the science wing. And I know that was one of the questions that Lonnie asked directly during the meeting, you know, where we're going to move it. And we were told no.
I would have to go back and look at that plan. It may just be a version of the plan where we're moving it, but the intent is to renovate existing science classrooms that are in the same place. So I don't know what wing that is, Alicia. It's not in the center of the building, but it was off to the side.
Correct. When you're looking at the plans themselves, if I'm on the right one, I think this was an earlier version of this that's off into the side wing of the building. When you're looking at it, I believe on the plans, it's more towards, or is it the left of the,
Yeah.
It's not the center of the building. But I
Okay.
think that, I think that was just a copies of the historical concepts on there. But as Lauren mentioned, after all the meetings we've had, that is the intent. We wouldn't move those rooms.
Okay. No, I know Lonnie brought it up during the meetings, and he said there would be a lot of additional cost to move it. And I was just concerned that I thought that might be the latest version.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, Tom, that's I'm glad you brought that forward tonight, because again, the science rooms are pretty costly once you have all your gas and your hookups in those rooms. And I think, Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, when we last met with the high school team at one of the end meetings, they're a little concerned about getting more space because we had showed a reduction due to our enrollment numbers. So it is something that we said we do have to revisit as we move along. If that does become a consideration, that we have, we don't take away science rooms, but because we may need more if the enrollment numbers prove to be different than what they are now. So yeah, absolutely. Agreed. Yeah, those won't move.
Yeah, just so you guys know, I budgeted for almost 10,000 square feet of science classrooms, and I budgeted for a full gut. What we're finding today that with the improved program, the science classrooms are changing quite a bit, and we're on average between new casework and how the program works, we're running between $300 to $350 a foot to renovate a science classroom. So just gives you an idea of where we're at industry costs today.
So just keeping an eye on time, just this one sheet, just sticking to this quickly. Were there any kind of initial questions? You know, these are important discussions, and I really, you know, I think it's important that we don't rush them. Also received, and I think Lauren was going to get to it, and it was one of our slides, was that the materials that were distributed today, where it kind of combined a lot of the information into one, those were really, and Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, they were really just a snapshot again of the high and medium priorities, kind of shaded. I think gray was ones that are already included in the 60 million health and safety. And then I think the blue was other priorities leading up to what's on the screen now. Am I correct, Lauren?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay. So a piece of this, because what I want to end with tonight is that we do have a timeline and communication piece, and I do want to spend some on that. Would the board prefer to put the other scopes of priority in sort of the parking lot tonight? And then I know that you've given us a lot of information to go back to the table and analyze and bring back. May I offer that we do have a facilities meeting coming up? We could either continue the discussion of refining and looking at the other proposed scope of priority and invite any board member that would like to attend our meeting. And or we can also do our homework with the questions that you've asked on this. With the other priority scopes, you could let Dr. Pritchard know if you have a chance to look at the spreadsheet, maybe other scopes besides what's on the slide now that you'd be interested in taking a deeper look at. We can prepare that and come back on the November 19th meeting as an update. if that's,
Alicia, I would just throw it as a recommendation, right? I think there's so much involved in the other scope that we were
Yeah.
going through. I almost don't even want to touch this list yet. Just my recommendation. I think we really have to get comfortable with the first piece before we start introducing it. So we've got to stay focused and getting through segments.
Thanks, and I can appreciate it because I just hearing the conversation tonight and all the work that's been behind. I agree. There's a lot behind the work here. Just hearing Lou and Laura and everybody talk. So if the board doesn't mind, what I'd like to do is it's 10:12. If I could just quickly have the team go through the time and communications plan quick, because I think there's an important piece to that aspect, given our timeline and sort of our key benchmark to-dos that we would have to meet leading up to a potential project. So Dave and Jen, would you mind running us through these last remaining slides on this?
Sure. Jen, do you want me to start or you want to start?
No, if you want to start first, David, and then I can take the next slide, I think.
Okay, great. So this is a timeline that just shows big blocks of time. One thing I want to emphasize is that I know the board was feeling a lot of pressure about making decisions and pushing this forward a little bit too fast, or faster than they were comfortable with. But I just want to reiterate that there's a series of board meetings that you're going to see on the slide that Jen's going to talk about that go all the way up to the date that you see here, May 6th, which is a date, it's a scheduled board meeting, and it's a date that you don't have a lot scheduled, where you would actually have to make the decision on what the bond scope is and cost. So there's a lot of time and a lot of opportunities to have your regular meetings with discussion or special board meetings to get from where we are today to where you need to be. So you see on May the 6th, and this is a date that I chose because it is a regular board meeting. Your June board meeting is you have a lot of celebrations scheduled on that day, usually retirement. So we try not to put a decision-making task on that date. It gives you plenty of time between now and then, and also it allows us to not do a lot of hard work during the summer. We found that if you do a lot of hard work during the summer, the community might feel like they were excluded because a lot of people are traveling or on vacation, and the communication is just much more difficult during that time. So again, this schedule is based on my experience and some guidance that we had from Alicia and my conversations with Jen. And then you'll see there's another long period of time between that date in May and the actual date of the referendum, which is shown as November 16th, where we would try to engage the community in any way we can. Tough to say what it's going to be with COVID, but this would be building tours, mailings, Zoom meetings, board meetings, Saturday events, or whatever we need to do. So this is the big bold plan. The next slide, I think it's okay. So this slide, did we get a copy of this to everybody, Alicia?
We did, Dave.
Okay, so we won't go into the scope. Jen's going to talk a little bit about it, and then I'll fill in after she finishes, and we'll talk about this slide a little bit.
Okay, let me switch to this slide.
Okay.
Yeah, great. So I guess, in terms of the communication, as David just said, most of the public facing communication would really start after May 6th, pretty much after the budget vote. And we would be doing a lot of prep work, May, June, July, and then we would be starting to produce and pull material together in August to get to layout, to get to a printer, looking for and sending out a notification about building tours and forums by mid-September in order to hold forums and building tours the month of October. And that's based on a November 16 referendum vote. So, October would be pretty intensive. And then into November, we would still be releasing videos. There would still be communications. There would be a bond mailing that would go out on November 1st. But it would be a pretty multimedia intense campaign from pretty much once we get back to school until mid-November. And I know that we haven't figured out what the there's not been much conversation about what the calendar is next year, but it looks like, just from my view, that Labor Day is late again, and the day after Labor Day is Rosh Hashanah. So that means that it looks like, I'm guessing, that we probably might not start back until September 8th. And so that was another reason, because we're kind of starting back a little bit later. That's a reason, again, why we would want to have those building tours in October, give people a little bit of time to settle into the new school year, and then we would start those building tours and forums in October.
Yeah. Alicia, can you go back to the other slide with the detailed slide? So I won't talk a lot about this, but if you have it, just look at the 3 colored bars at the top. So the blue is shown as the facilities committee work, and I do lump Jen into that committee, so you'll see her work is in blue also. Yellow is tasks that involve the Board of Education, and green are tasks that would involve stakeholder groups. And we still need to identify who those key component stakeholder component groups are, because as we move later into the process, we're going to be looking for them to provide input to the board before you make your decision on May the 6th. And then most importantly, helping us to communicate the plan to their constituent groups between May 6th and the vote date of November the 16th. So again, you'll see the small yellow rectangles are scheduled board meetings where you have in your long range, your calendar, some conversation about facilities planning or long range planning. So I put those dates in. It's just really a reminder of all the opportunities that we have to get community input and then push that information back out after May the 6th. None of this is, none of those dates are firm. It's really just our first blush at it to get from where we are now to where we need to be on November the 16th.
And one of the things that we wanted to keep a schedule going was just that this informs our work, and it just keeps a calendar and a timeline at mind. And it still allows us that we're going through our long range financial and strategic planning, as well as budget development, that we just continue to make sure that the conversations are interconnected and that we just use our time wisely, that, we don't miss an opportunity or something that we need to be doing to be able to position us if a decision is made to move towards the referendum. So thank you, Jen and Dave, for that. With the debrief, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Pritchard. We did take a lot of notes this evening, and one was a next step slide. So I'm just going to leave it on that. And before I turn it back over to Dr. Pritchard, before we conclude, and I know it's getting late, and thank you everyone for all your time this evening. We took the notes tonight. The team will come back to the table. There's deeper analysis to be done. I fully agree and appreciate Mr. LaMadrid's feedback from this evening. This is very comprehensive. It's been almost 3 years of work. We certainly don't expect for the board for us to come to you in 2 meetings or 3 meetings, and then you have everything that you need to further give us direction on scope of work. Next week, we do have facilities. And if it's okay with Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Henry, I'd like to bring some of this analysis and discussion back to the experts at the table with the facilities committee. And then the following week with Mr. LaMadrid and Mr. Jacobs, we have audit and finance on November 17th. And that's where we'll start to take a deeper dive, as discussed at the last audit and finance, into the sensitivity analysis in terms of looking at this from a financial perspective, which is quite timely given our long-range financial. So we'll continue to use those committees and the expertise around those tables in terms of looking at a scope of work and the analysis and the deeper dive from that end from a facilities perspective, and then use the expertise at the table around the audit and finance to really examine this from the financial lens. So we plan to do that on November 17th as well. And Bob, I would like to turn it over to you at this time, because I know it's getting late. We have a few minutes left. So thank you, everyone.
So I think that for me, the most important takeaway tonight is it's very obvious that the project team was listening We oftentimes express what our desires and our expectations are, but it's also important that we are able to see some evidence that we're actually listening. And I appreciate Lauren, Tarcio, and project team, and Lou, David, and all the folks who participate in those subcommittee meetings coming back tonight and being able to put together this presentation, because it is very obvious that we are incrementally making progress on this conversation towards ultimately, putting together what I consider to be a meaningful project for the children, the students in this community. So I won't belabor this much longer. Obviously, much of the heavy lifting is going to be done in the subcommittees, as we've alluded to. I'll defer to Lonnie and the governance team to decide whether or not, how open we want to make our subcommittee meetings to the board as a whole. Certainly, if we don't want to think that because I guess my point being, when we have other work to do besides capital projects. I know that we're looking forward to on the 19th to make a return back to the conversation, the dialogue on strategic goal setting for this operating cycle. I know our principals are working very hard on that, as well as our cabinet. So anything we can get done, because there's never enough time to do the work that we need to do, or do the planning, or have those conversations. I would suggest that if any other board members were willing, these are all open meetings. So if you're willing to, take some time to join us for those facility meetings, we'll make sure that we provide you with those dates. And maybe it just provide a little bit more continuity in the discussion. So that would be fantastic as well. But again, like I previously alluded, I just want to thank everyone for their input, for their commitments to this work. Obviously, it's reflected in this evening's presentation. And I feel really good about the progress we're making. It does feel as if we are starting to gain some momentum here. And I think it really is a tribute to the fine commitments that each of you has made. So thank you very much for that. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Jacobs for any closing thoughts.
So I have two closing comments before I solicit the other board members to see if they have any comments. But I believe one of the underlying themes that came out of tonight's presentation is that the larger the number of an item, the more questions are asked. So if we can break things down into smaller values, I think the questions will be, less, or at least more pointed, rather than trying to digest and understand a larger component. The other question I have is that I know we're focusing on the long range plan and then this larger project, but I don't want to lose sight of work for this upcoming summer. I don't want to lose an opportunity. So I ask that the facilities committee and the board, consider that we're running out of time to plan something, to get something done this summer. So, and I emulate Dr. Pritchard's words in terms of appreciating everybody's time and commitment towards this effort. We've had a long road so far, and we're heading down to the final stretch, and it'll still take a considerable amount of effort to get us to that final mark. But we've put the effort in so far. If we can carry it the rest of the way, it'd be great. So, do any other board members have any comments that they want to add? I can't see you because I've got only a couple of people on my tile. So if you want to see something, you gotta say something. You gotta speak up.
Not from my side, Lonnie. Thank you.
I have one comment, Lonnie. I think we're talking about 2 summers though, right? So we should be as proactive as possible, because it's not only the summer of 21, it's the summer of 22, because if we do go with this referendum, we're not talking about any work until summer of 23, right? Yeah, I hope.
100% correct. 100% correct. And the work identified for the summer of 21 and the summer of 22 should be work that, augments and leads into what we're doing. Yes. I'm just concerned we're running out of time for this summer. That's why I was focused. You're 100% correct. It's to get back to our plan of continually working through the off season, summer season, to make the best use of the time that we can.
Yeah. But then on the other side, I still have some deep concerns about putting forward next year, because I know we're still going to be dealing with COVID, and hopefully things will be better, but who knows? Putting forward a 40, 80, whatever the number is, a referendum, or even starting to communicate this, because we're going to start communicating it in earlier than that, while people are still struggling. People are still don't have jobs. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Yes, but again, step one is to all agree upon what the district needs, right? And then how we implement it, maybe we have to look at a different picture to implement it. And that's something that we're going to lean on the finance committee for help with their financial expertise. Twofold really. The financial committee's expertise in terms of financing and budgeting, with regard to the project, but also they're more involved in the global economy, the regional economy, that they could provide some insight as to what's happening from their side of things in terms of the financial picture, collectively, it's a global question as to are we ready? Are we doing the right thing, or do we need to, stretch it out, extend it, reduce it? That's a heavy lean on the financial committee. Tom, did you want to say something?
Just thank you for the team for putting the presentation together. To your point about the work for the next 2 years, next 2 summers, I'm just wondering if the William O. Schaefer renovation of classrooms makes sense, just because we wouldn't have to get SED approval.
No, we would need SED approval, I think, to get 8 on it, if we want to get 8 on it.
Okay.
I'll leave that for Alicia and the architects to figure out.
Okay.
Kara, I don't see you, but do you have anything to add?
Nope, I'm okay right now.
All right. So I think that wraps it up for this evening. Again, it ran later than I would have liked it to run, but I think we had a lot of good conversation and got into some good in-depth thought of what we're doing. So I appreciate everybody's time and commitment. We're in a workshop, so there's no adjournment from this. So I can tell everybody have a good night.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.